Today's date is November 10th, 2011. I am Jose Maria Silvestrini, and I am not related to the interviewee. This interview is being conducted for the World War II Veterans History Project, sponsored by the Historical Society of Palm Beach County and Oxbridge Academy of the Palm Beaches. This oral history will be sent for inclusion in the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Okay, to start off, would you please spell your name?
First name Robert, last name Erskine, E-R-S-K-I-N-E.
And what is your birth date?
12/5/1924. You've heard of 1924?
I haven't.
Good.
What war did you serve in?
World War II.
And what branch of the service were you in?
Army.
Army. And where were you born?
Brooklyn, New York.
Would you please tell us a little bit about your family?
Well, I had one brother who, by the way, was killed in World War II. And I must say my parents were never the same. My mother especially never recovered from that. But that's about it. We lived in Brooklyn most of our lives, then moved to Long Island, and that's about it.
What branch of the military did your brother serve in?
He was a naval pilot, a bomber pilot.
And what were you doing before you joined the service?
I was going to college. I was at the University of New Hampshire, taking a pre-veterinary course. I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I just decided, as the war was heating up, that I couldn't go to school, so I came back and went in the service.
So you enlisted then?
Well, what I did is actually veterinarian, pre-vet and pre-med at that time were exempt from the draft. So I was exempt. I could have gone through college without it, but I just didn't want to, so I went to my draft board. I remember it like it was yesterday, because I thought she was an old lady. She was probably 35 years old, 40 years old. Said, "Oh, how brave you are to give up your exemption." And so I did, and then I went in the service.
And how old were you when you joined the military?
Almost 90, 18 and a half, maybe.
Did your parents approve of you being in the military?
No.
No, not at all?
No, they wanted me to stay in school.
And what were you doing on December 7th, 1941? Or do you remember what was going on that day?
Oh, I sure do, because as I recall, it was a Sunday.
Yeah, it was.
And I was listening. There was no television in those days. I was listening to a football game, because they had pro football on Sundays then, and all the interruptions came about the Japanese attacking us at Pearl Harbor. I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was, neither did my parents. But that's where I was, at home, listening to a football game, probably the New York Giants.
That's nice. And after you joined the military, how did you adapt to the new military lifestyle?
How did I adapt?
Like to the regime?
I thought it was wholesome. It was difficult and an entirely different type of life, but it was solid, and I was proud to be in it.
And during the war, where did you serve?
Well, I served in a lot of places in the States, and in Europe I was in England, Scotland, France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany.
And out of all the places you served, which one do you remember best?
Well, I gotta say Belgium. And I say that because, A, that's where the Battle of the Bulge was fought. So we were there for maybe 7, 8 weeks of battle. Secondly, I must say this. In 2002, I took my whole family to Europe. My 2 sons, my daughter and her husband, and my wife, of course, at the bequest of people from Belgium, whose town we had liberated from the Nazis. And they treated us, I can't begin to tell you how wonderful they were. I almost have tears every time I think of them. They still send me Christmas cards and letters, and We had a marvelous time with them. And believe me when I tell you, the Belgian people right now think so highly of them. You know, often the Americans, we're not too well liked around the world, but we're still loved in Belgium. They still honor us and they treat us on a pedestal. So I must say Belgium for that reason.
And during the war, you served as a medic. Could you please explain what a medic does?
Well, the first thing you are is where you are. I was in an infantry division. That's the way it's set up. That's the people that fight are the infantry. In an infantry division, there is a medical battalion. And so I was in the medical battalion of the 78th Infantry Division.
And what were you doing besides, obviously helping people after they had been wounded?
Well, I did get a lucky break. Towards the end of, actually, the Bulge. Each division, a division has 15,000 men in it. 3 regiments of rifle soldiers and various other things, the field artillery and so on. And it has 1 psychiatrist. In the medical battalion, for 15,000 men, there's 1 psychiatrist. He took a liking to me, and so he made me his assistant. So I was the enlisted man, that's opposed to an officer. He was the officer, he was a major, Major Plessett, and I was the person, and I had people under me. We mostly took care of, it was called combat exhaustion then. I don't know what they call it now. World War I, I remember they used to say it was called shell shock. World War II, it was called combat exhaustion. Now I don't know what it is, but it's fellas that are can't adjust. They're shaking. They're just absolutely out of control. And so that's what I did with the major.
That's interesting. And what unit were you assigned to? I'm not sure if you mentioned this already, but
The 78th Infantry Division. That's this outfit right here, 78th Infantry Division.
And what was the mission of your unit?
Win the war. There are various and sundry missions. It so happens during the Bulge, if we're talking about the Bulge, we did many more things besides the Bulge. There's a river we were already in Germany when the Germans broke through to create the Bulge. They broke through just south of us. We were in the northern spot. They broke through just south of us, so we were divided from the rest of the American troops. And there's a river right there called the Roer, R-O-E-R River. And there's several dams, 3 dams I think, the main one called Schwammenul Dam, that controlled the Roer River. And if the dams ever burst, or the Germans blew them up, it would create a floodplain all the way across Germany. It was estimated that could be as much as 1.5 miles wide. So it was our mission to capture the Schwammenul Dam. That was the 78th's mission at that time. This is early December. And that's what it was.
I see. And you said that you were involved in other battles besides the Battle of
Oh,
Bulge?
sure. After we finally broke through, crossed the Roer River, continued on, then we moved very well towards the Rhine River. Now, the Rhine River is a much bigger river even than the Roer. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the Germans blew up every single bridge across the Rhine from way up north to way down south, except one. And indeed, we were told that Hitler had all the officers that were in charge of that dam executed for not having blown it up. They had the explosives there, but it wasn't blown up. We were the first infantry troops to cross the Rhine River. Of any human beings on earth, we were the first infantry to cross the Rhine. Now, that's not because we were so brave, or we just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Right. And how did that feel when you were the first ones to cross the bridge?
Well, it was very scary, because the bridge, it's called the Bridge of Remagen. By the way, a great movie was made on that, I think with superstars, Henry Fonda and a lot of famous people, about called the Bridge on the Rhine or something like that. I forget what I was going to say. What were we talking about?
We were talking
By the way, I'm 86 and a half years and 11/12 years old, so I'm a little elderly.
It's all right.
Oh, it was not a walking or a riding bridge. It was a railroad bridge, this Remagen Bridge. It's called Remagen Bridge because it's the town of Remagen on the west side of the bridge, just down from a large German city called Bonn, where Beethoven was born. Bonn. We could see Bonn. So it was a very complicated bridge, and there were big holes in it and railroad tracks and so on. But at any rate, that's what we did.
And was there a battle trying to capture the bridge?
We did, no, yeah, but the problem with that was the only way to get from the west side of Germany to the east side, towards Berlin. So the Germans, and this is another interesting fact, on the east side of the Rhine, it's big cliffs, high up. You go way uphill on the east side. And they had field artillery there. They kept trying to hit the bridge to collapse it. Then we saw what were airplanes, and it was the first jet planes that... America had no jet planes. There were no such thing as... Everything was a propeller in America at that time. And we saw these jet planes without propellers, and they made our planes look like they were in slow motion. They came around and threw bombs at the bridge. Now, they're fighter planes, so they're not bomber planes, and therefore I'm sure the pilots literally threw the bombs out. But this went on for about 2 or 3 days, and obviously they never hit they're coming maybe 500 miles an hour around the cliff, and then as soon as it comes around the cliff, our artillery's trying to hit them, our ack. And at any rate, they weakened the bridge. They never really hit it, but there were so many, about 4 or 5 days later, we had already had tens of thousands of troops crossing by then. The bridge actually collapsed. It fell right into the Rhine.
And were you there for this, or had you already? Were you there for this, or had you already pushed forward into Germany?
Well, no, we were on the east side of the Rhine, and in fact we were in a nice castle. Because remember, we're medics, so our soldiers are up ahead of us, and they're sending their wounded back to us, and we're staying in a lovely castle on the top of the Rhine.
That's interesting. And besides the Battle of the Bulge and the capturing of Remagen Bridge, what else did you do during the war?
Enjoyed it? Wow. That's the 2 major battles, I guess. Every day is a battle, but actually going from the Rhine right on through to the end of VE Day. Oh, I can tell you this. It's now April, and we're moving. Once we crossed the Rhine, there was no question America was going to win the war. They were just collapsing all over, giving up. We caught, tens of thousands of prisoners of war, mostly young ones. By that time, they had just young, I'm telling you, kids your age in the service, fighting for Germany by then. And older men, too, because they had lost all their regular troops. But anyhow, in April, every month, the division would give out 2 what they call Class A furloughs. A Class A furlough was 7 days of your choosing where you want to be. 15,000 men and only 2 guys go. I was one of them in April. They did that once a month. And they always picked 2 guys from the same outfit so that you knew each other. At any rate, we, Cliff Johnson from Griffin, Georgia, he was a nice guy, lovely fellow. So we got the furlough, which was wonderful to get away from the front lines. We get back to a rest camp. Then they send us back to another camp deeper into France. And then they say, you have a choice of going to Paris or London. We looked at a map, and London is further away than is Paris from the fighting, so we said we want London. So we went to London, and the furlough doesn't start until you get to the destination. To make a long story short, we were gone 31 days for the 7-day pass. At any rate, we were, the furlough was over. We came back from Edinburgh, Scotland to London, took the boat across to the States, went to Paris. That night, we're supposed to catch a train in Paris to take us into Germany, which then they would take us back to our company. That's the day the war ended. Cliff and I, boy, can I see that, are sitting in an outdoor cafe in Paris. It's about 10 a.m., but we're drinking. We actually drank alcohol in those days. We're drinking, and suddenly there's a commotion, and we see it around us. La guerre est finie, la guerre est finie. At any rate, the war ended. We were heading back to the front line, so it was the most thrilling thing of our life, knowing that we no longer had any danger involved. But so we were in Paris, France, Cliff and I, when the war ended. The war meaning in Europe, not in Japan.
And was Cliff one of your friends in the military?
Were any of my friends?
Was one of your friends in the military?
Oh, many were, but I didn't. Not where I was. Most everybody was in the military. It was the whole country was. You were either 4F, which means you physically couldn't, or you were in the military doing something.
And since the war in Europe was already over, were you completely in Europe? Were you done by that point?
Was I completely what?
Were you done fighting by that point?
Absolutely done fighting. Mm-hmm. Then we were called occupation troops. We were occupying Germany, keeping it under control, getting rid of the bad apples that were running cities and towns and so on, and replacing them with whoever. That's what we were doing.
And where were you when you heard about Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
I was in a town called Hafgeismar, which is up in it's like a touristy town under normal conditions. And there was a big roundhouse there, like a theater. And we were in the roundhouse watching a movie with Rita Hayworth and Fred Astaire. It was a musical. And it was just starting, and then the buzz, hey, you hear about Hiroshima? And that's when the bomb went off.
And how do you remember, once the war was over, how do you remember coming back home?
Oh, I do. Because I was the sole surviving son. My brother had been killed, sadly, not much before that, but he was in the Philippines. He was killed in early May of that year. And therefore I was the sole surviving son. Apparently you get priority on return to the States. So I was given it's called an rest and relaxation furlough to the States. Not with my outfit, just all by myself.
And backtracking a little bit, could you describe your experiences at the Battle of the Bulge?
Well, the main problem was the weather. It goes in history as the worst, ever since they've been keeping weather, there was the worst, most brutal winter ever. That's why it lasted so long, because of the planes couldn't fly. There were no planes for at least, because we dominated the air, but the American airplanes couldn't get up because the weather was so bad. It was very cold, very snowy. In fact, so bad, being a medic, I can tell you this, we lost more men from frostbite and a thing called trench foot, I got trench foot too, than we did from being wounded or killed. By the way, to show you how severe the Battle of the Bulge was, the statistics are 19,000 Americans were killed in the Battle of the Bulge. 81,000 were wounded. It lasted 6 weeks.
What about your homecoming? How did you adjust to civilian life?
How did what?
One second. What is trench foot?
Trench foot is not as bad as frostbite, but you never changed shoes because you never knew when you see, when they broke through, everything was in disarray. And many of them wore American uniforms. They spoke English as well as you or I did, so we had to change passwords very often. It was a very complicated time. And you never took your shoes off, you never took your socks off, and it was freezing cold and snowy, so in time, you either get trench foot, which is, and I always have cold feet. Oh boy, they're always cold. But it wasn't that bad. Although I could have, when I got discharged, they told me, you know, if you allow yourself to go back in and get an inspection and so on, you can get a disability. Thank you, Jane Erskine. You can get a disability for the rest of your life. I said, but that means I have to stay here another week? And they said, yes. No, I want my discharge now. So I took it now. And it wasn't that severe. I've done fine.
That's good. And you said that you had to exchange a lot of passwords because
during the first few days of the Bulge, correct. You have to understand, we were already in Germany, our outfit, the 78th and the 106th and so on. They broke through just south of us, just right behind us, an area called Malmedy and such. And everything was in disarray for at least about a week. They changed signs, they did all kinds of things to confuse us, because it was totally unanticipated. Obviously our intelligence wasn't intelligent. We didn't realize this could happen, and it did. So things were very hectic. You never were sure any given moment what was going on. It was disarray. And that lasted maybe as much as a whole week.
Okay. And could you please tell me something about what happened at Malmedy?
Well, Malmedy was below us, but we are aware of it. That was the worst massacre, and that's what it's called, the Malmedy Massacre, of the war. When they broke through, they captured thousands and thousands of American soldiers. That was the 106th Division, just below us, mostly. They had a bunch of, I can't recall, I think 100 or so Americans, and they literally put them all together out in the field. Malmedy is right, we were up on a hill in a town called Rotkin, and they were Malmedy's down there, and they machine gunned them to death, instead of making them prisoners of war, as we would do when we captured Germans.
And did you know
it was the worst affront to a decency that the Germans ever did, the worst that they ever did.
And did you know anyone who died at Malmedy?
No, I don't. I didn't know that.
And what did it feel like having to watch that, or were you?
Oh, I couldn't see it. We were aware of it, but I couldn't see it. I can tell you another interesting thing if you've got the patience to listen.
We've got nothing but time.
We're in Rhineland. This is before the Bulge. And a plane, American bomber plane, with only 2 engines going, is right above us, and he has to make a crash landing, and he lands right in our field. I mean, 100 feet away from us. An excellent landing. There wasn't snow on the ground then. And I even have pictures of it. I don't know. I have pictures of the plane in the air right in front of us, and then I have pictures of the 10 American airmen. They came into our... Every one of them survived. Not only survived, they landed... This is remarkable. They landed in what was known as a minefield.
Oh.
The Germans did a lot of that. They called shoe mines. If you walk on it and the mine would... You step on it, and the moment you lift your foot, the bullet comes up and hits you. It was a terrible minefield, and we even had signs around it saying, "Beware, minefield." These guys, they landed, they were so thrilled, they all get out, and they're hollering and running, and we're hollering, "Watch it!" Not one of them hit one of the mines, which is remarkable.
Oh, that's luck.
And we have pictures of them. I'll tell you another interesting thing. When we went over in 2002, there was a lovely German gentleman who was our guide at Rhineland. He took me to the places where I stayed and such. And he was desperate to know. He knew about the plane. And he was desperate to know what plane it was and who the soldiers, who the air people were. And he is the historian for that in Germany. He could never find out. He wrote me letters previous to my coming over. I would give him. He finally discovered it quite a few years later. The reason nobody could find out is the airmen, when they came. The 10 guys came, we took their picture, they stayed with us maybe an hour or two, and then vehicles came and took them back to the rear. And then they were interrogated, and they thought they were in a town different from the town that we were in. So they kept saying they crashed in, I forget, the guy finally discovered it. And that's why nobody ever discovered what outfit that was until only a few years ago. Then, believe it or not, because it was such an interesting story, there were about 8 of those guys still alive. They all met, and I have their picture too. There's a picture of them now meaning 10 years ago or so. And I just found it fascinating.
That was an interesting story.
And I have like I say, I actually have I never owned a camera in my life. I never took a picture. I don't know how I have these pictures. I have no memory who took them and how I got them, but I do have them.
Interesting. And did you ever meet General S. Patton or Brigadier General Alvin Erzak?
I'm a very good friend of General Erzak's. I never met General Patton.
No.
They were tankers, and we were infantry, and we're never together.
Could you explain
During the war.
Could you explain the difference between tankers and infantry?
Well, that's a tank. We didn't have any tanks. Infantry Division, like I say, is 15,000 men, composed of 9,000 fighting men, infantry soldiers. Then there's a big field artillery. There's 4 companies of field artillery, 4 companies of medics, quartermaster. In other words, 9,000 troops, 6,000 support, so to speak. So, tankers, they had an entirely different kind of division. If it was a tank division, I have no idea how they're made up. But we only saw them as they would pass us or whatever. We never mixed with them.
So how did you become friends with Albert and Isaac?
Through this outfit here, there's a chapter in South Florida called the Veterans of the Battle of the Bulge. They're all over America, these chapters. And he is the honorary president of our Southeast chapter, which is the third largest in the United States.
And besides General Erzak, have you kept up with any of your other veteran friends?
I did keep up with some of my compatriots for a lot of years, but everyone that I kept up with is now gone except one. Tommy Graziani is still around, and he's a sweetheart.
Was he in your division?
Oh, he was in my company.
Oh, okay.
He was always a private. He was always getting into trouble. They would promote him to PFC, down to private again. Promote him up to corporal, down to private again. Tommy was that way. I became a sergeant. I was a nice fellow. Don't I look nice?
Yes. Could you explain the differences in the rank?
Rank?
Mm-hmm.
Private first class, corporal, sergeant, and then there's 4 elements of sergeant. There's a sergeant, there's a technical sergeant, there's a master sergeant, there's a first sergeant. That's the end of what they call non-commissioned officers. I was a non-commissioned officer. The moment you say the word lieutenant, then it becomes a commissioned officer. And from lieutenant all the way up to general.
What is a commissioned officer?
Generally, it's older than us and smarter than us. You know, we were 18, 19 years old. The commissioned officers were mostly fellas that had been to college and such. I don't know there's a definite divide between non-commissioned and commissioned, and I really don't know the official reasons for it.
I see. And how do you think your wartime experiences have altered your life?
Well, you are what you are. I don't know how to say that. There's a camaraderie that is unbelievable between, you know, you might think that we're always scared, but you got each other. And because you have each other, you learn a real bond. But you're less scared because you know Tommy's there and Joe is there and Harry is over there, and they're all suffering the same way you are. And it makes for a terrific bond.
And what life lessons did you learn in the military?
Well, I learned how to shoot a guy in the arm with a needle. They did teach, I did take a lot of, I went to a special school in Missouri. I learned the 212 bones in the human body and things like that. But I never pursued a medical career, so I only learned how to be a man, maybe, and how to accept orders, and even if you don't appreciate it, if it's your superior, you better do what your superior says. And even if you disagree with it, you better do what your superior says. You learn that much because you pay a terrible price if you don't.
I see. And what did you do then if you didn't go into medicine when you came back? Why
I didn't?
No. Yes, why didn't you? And what did you do then?
Well, as soon as I came back on a furlough. Then, during the furlough, I got orders that I was going to be discharged. And the Army and its intelligence, I lived in Brooklyn. I was with my parents in Brooklyn. They sent me the papers to say you have to go to Neosho, Missouri to be discharged and then come back home again. So I went to Camp Crowder, Missouri, and there I got discharged. Then, during my furlough, in New York, like because I was on a 45-day furlough before the discharge, my parents made me write to different colleges. They said, you must go to college. That's all there is to it. I had had that 1 year at New Hampshire, so I wrote to colleges, and I wrote to, amongst others, Syracuse University accepted me. But they sent a telegram saying, you must report, and the telegram, the date to report was the day before already, so I'm already a day late. That's an interesting, it's just, it has nothing to do with the war. Is it okay to talk about these things?
Yeah.
I get in the train, you didn't take planes in those days. I get in the train in Brooklyn to go to Syracuse. And I meet a bunch of soldiers and sailors in the club compartment and get a little woozy and so on. At any rate, I get to Syracuse and I go to the admissions office. And there's a woman in charge of admissions at Syracuse University called Mrs. Alice, A-L-L-I-S. And I say, I'm here, here's my papers, I should have been here yesterday, but you didn't send it to me until... She says, I'm sorry, there's no room for you anymore. See, the GIs were returning by the thousands, so colleges were getting filled up fast. So they had already, she says, there's no room for you for residents. We're all filled up. I said, oh, no. She said, well, I'm sorry, but that's... Leave your name and address, and if there's an opening, somebody has to cancel, we'll let you know. So I mentioned my name, Erskine. Right away, she goes like this. She says, that's my maiden name. She says, we're going to get you in. And they put me up in a hotel in downtown Syracuse on the 5th floor of a hotel. And so that's how I got into Syracuse. That's where I met my wife 2 days later, who was sitting right there. So I had no freedom, by the way, as a single man. None.
The 2 glory days.
2 days, yeah.
And well, was there anything that you'd like people to know about this period of history?
Well, it was a very ugly... The world was... The Nazi regime was the most horrible thing that ever was foisted on the human race. They were terrible. Now, that doesn't mean all the Germans were terrible. Of course not. The German soldiers were fine. But the SS troopers, those were the guys that were the Nazis, and all the Nazi regime were just horrible. We went to towns and we liberated Hungarians and Romanians who were slave laborers. The Germans took them, brought them back, and they had them in munitions factories and so on, constructing and so on. We liberated a lot of good disabled people. But so I'm very proud of the fact that you have to understand that there was a period of time when it was undecided whether the Allies would win or the German-Japanese Axis would win. It would be a very different world if they had won the war. And the whole world was at war. That's why it was called war. But the world was at war. Everybody, every country was at war.
And kind of switching from a darker side to a lighter side, what was the funniest thing that happened to you in the military?
Funniest thing? I'm sure a lot, I can't think of at the moment. I'm sorry, I'd like to think of something, but because we did laugh a lot. I can't think of any one thing that might...
And while the war was still going on, what did you do in your off hours when you weren't on duty?
Sleep. Well, you're on duty almost all the time, especially, well, I keep referring to the Bulge. There was no off duty. It was 24 hours constantly.
Always had your shoes on. You always had your shoes on.
That's right, and socks.
And socks.
And we didn't have winter uniforms. We didn't have boots. We didn't have overcoats. So we froze.
Unfortunate conditions. Is there anything else you'd like to add? You seem to have gone through everything.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
My mom recalls where she was when Franklin Roosevelt died. She heard that, and that is one of those moments.
You're right.
In my life, it's John F. Kennedy assassination, the Challenger exploding. These guys, I'm sure 9/11, even though they were very, very young, you know, there's some memories there. Do you?
Absolutely remember it like it was yesterday. We were deep, way past the Rhine. We had liberated a munitions factory, and they were either Romanian or Hungarians. I can't check which. And they were very happy, except that they all went into town and started beating up on the Germans. And I remember that's where it happened. And we were so saddened by it. Because he was an idol to us. He really was. That's all I can say is it was a very sad period of time. We mourned him, but life goes on.
So is there anything else you'd like to add about your experiences in the military or how you came back?
Oh, yes, there's a good one, how I came back, now that you mention it. Remember, I came back not with my outfit. The 78th Division, they went on into Berlin and occupied Berlin and so on and stayed many more months. But remember, I came back early because of that special furlough. So they take a bunch of trains and you get near the French coast, near the Atlantic, near Le Havre and so on. And they named the camps there after cigarettes. There was Camp Lucky Strike, Camp Chesterfield, and so on. I went to Camp Lucky Strike. And that's where the medical doctors check you, because World War I, the soldiers came back and brought a lot of disease to America from Europe. Influenza, in fact, there was a terrible influenza epidemic in the United States from World War I soldiers that brought it back from Europe. So, being aware of that, they set us up in tents at Camp Lucky Strike. And we had you just hang around is what it amounts to. You have to check on how much money you're taking with you and what goods you're taking with you, and they give you different shots. And you get sick from the shots, so you have to stay in the tents for quite a few days. All right, now we're ready to, the war is over, our war is over, so it's no more danger. We get on a Liberty ship, they're called Liberty ships, they made hundreds, maybe thousands of them during the war. Quite a few thousand soldiers get on a Liberty ship. So I'm on this Liberty ship, and the decks, where you're sleeping, they have these cots, and they're 5 high. And I'm lucky, I was in the 5th high one, because, remember, there's no danger anymore. There's no German submarines, so that war is over. So it's going back all by itself. Going overseas, I went over in a big convoy, 300 and something ships. But this is all by itself. It's the 3rd day out, and they announced to us, because everybody's getting bored, something, the Liberty ships don't move fast. Everybody's getting bored, so they said, down in the hold, they're going to show a movie. You're going to love it. So all you guys are going to see a movie. Everybody come down. I'm on the top, the 5th, there's 4, 3, 2, and 1. Leave it to the Army, or the Navy in that case. The movie is called Corvette K-226. Isn't it funny? I forget sometimes my wife's name, but I remember Corvette K-226. Randolph Scott, remember the name Randolph Scott? He's usually a cowboy hero, but in this time, Corvettes were Canadian destroyers. They called them Corvettes. So it was a Canadian type, and Randolph Scott is in it. And it's all about the Canadian Navy in the Atlantic fighting the Germans, and the ship is going like that. It's in terrible storms and everything. And about a third of the way through it, the guy starts throwing up because you're looking at terrible scenery and your boat is going ga, ga, ga. Oh, I forgot to tell you that. The rudder on our ship had broken down, so we're stalled in the Atlantic Ocean. That's why they showed us the movie, to pacify us.
Yeah.
So we're in a ship that's going like this in the ocean, 3 days off out of Europe, and they're showing us a movie with the everything. The Corvette is the whole. There was more. I hate to tell you this. There was more stuff on the ground than. You couldn't believe. Everybody is throwing up all over the place. We never got to see the second half of the movie. They realized what a mistake it was. And then we were very worried about that, about not getting home. So they said, don't worry, a destroyer's coming out from Portugal, and he'll come out here in another few days, and he'll fix your rudder. It turns out that they were able to fix the rudder a day or so later by itself. It took us 11, 12 days, but we got back. But that was very funny, if you could see thousands of guys throwing up at the same time.
And you mentioned that going to Europe, you came in a large convoy.
Tremendous convoy. It was a convoy, we were told, of 315 ships. And I was in the flagship because our general was on the ship, on our ship. So it was the safest ship of the convoy, right in the middle, and it was fascinating. If you got up on deck, in all directions, all you could see is destroyers and cruisers and all kinds of ships surrounding you, protecting you, because the German U-boats, you know, it was a dangerous item going across. So, but we felt quite safe because in every direction you saw American ships surrounding you.
Who was the
But
general?
that's the way the troops went across for the longest period of time, in large convoys. Otherwise, the German submarines would sink them.
And who was the general whose ship you were on?
General Edwin P. Parker, Jr.
Did he command you or your group?
He commanded the 78th Division.
Was he a good general?
We thought he was a good general, yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about your trip over to Europe?
Well, we went to England, and we stayed in a little town called Christchurch, actually a smaller town called Muddyford, and we stayed, we meaning my company, stayed in the house. Who's the famous author? Scott.
Oh, Walter Scott?
Walter Scott wrote Ivanhoe. It was a famous house. He was in that house when I don't mean when we were there, he was long dead.
Yeah.
But it was a great British author, so it was a pretty exciting thing. We would walk to the town of Christchurch. It was a very pleasant, the English were very nice, very pleasant, and they enjoyed having us visit. The women did, anyhow.
And how was your time in England before you were deployed to Germany?
2-3 weeks, maybe.
And you said it was an enjoyable time.
It was. There was a larger resort town called Bournemouth that we, on occasion, would go to. We didn't do much of anything. We enjoyed our 2 or 3 weeks there. A little bit of training, but mostly it was just waiting to be assembled to cross the English Channel into France.
And did you have to go through any sort of basic training?
Oh, sure. I think everybody had to. Every soldier that was drafted or enlisted had to go through basic training. I mean, you got to be taught how to march, how to salute, a few basics of the Army before they send you to some particular outfit. You can't go in cold.
And did you do your training in England, or where?
No, I did the training in, basic training was in Long Island, Camp Upton. Then the 78th trained down in Camp Butner. Camp Butner now is called the town of Butner, and there's a prison there, and that's where Bernie Madoff is, in Butner. So he might be sleeping in my bed. I was in Butner we trained there for well over a year at Butner, as a division.
And how was that experience there? How was that year that you spent in training?
Very difficult, because it was very hard. You know, you went on long hikes, a lot of physical hardness, in addition to classes on this and classes on that, but many because they had to harden you up. It's an infantry division. It's not people that are going to ride in jeeps or whatever. So it was difficult, and you were thrilled to be able to go to sleep every night. You slept well.
And what sort of classes did they make you take?
Oh, so many. Everything, in my case, mostly having to do with wounds and how to take care of various parts of the body, what are the various medicines and such.
Mr. Erskine, tomorrow is Veterans Day.
Yes.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to, you've got the youth of America sitting here, and
Well, I'm going to be in the parade down at Clematis. I think General Erskine going to be with us. Maybe not. The poor guy's getting crotchety. He's, what, 92, 93?
we had him in here
He's
a
a
couple weeks ago.
sweetheart.
He
Isn't
is.
he a wonderful
Absolutely.
person?
Yeah.
A marvelous American, I'll tell you that. And his wife, too, is a lovely person. Anyhow, we're going to be in the parade representing this outfit. There'll be about 4 or 5 of us, that's all. But we feel we owe it, and I must tell you, I've been in it about 4 times, the parade. And when people wave to us, and many of them say, thank you, I'm very proud and honored and appreciative that people would remember. I see parents with little kids waving to us, waving flags. I think it's a lovely gesture. We owe it to our troops now, and we owe it to the guys that performed in the past.
Well, Brokaw called,
Because we love America.
Tom Brokaw, in his book, The Greatest Generation, just absolutely extremely laudatory. And
He sure is.
everybody that we've interviewed so far, we're seeing that. Just normal guys that performed way above and
That's
beyond
all.
anything that you believe.
You don't know how much you can do or what you can do until you're put up against it. And then you find out, by gosh,
But you guys, our world would be a much scarier place right now.
oh, if we had lost that war, I don't even want to talk about it. The Nazi regime was a horrid regime.
Tell them how the Belgians felt when they were taken over by the Nazis.
Well,
and
yeah, that's
what
right.
they were forced to do. They could not speak their own language. They had to speak German. And there were many other, I'm sure, regulations.
Well, all the kids in the textbooks and everything, all their books were taken away from them, and they were given German books. They were told, you're now Germans. You're no longer Belgians.
So when they
That's
were
why these people
liberated-
love us so much now, as I was telling you.
I have a whole list of questions.
Oh, boy.
Okay, here we go.
Okay. You were at the 78th Infantry Division.
Yes.
What was the unit's nickname?
What was what?
Did the unit have a nickname?
The Lightning Division.
And-
Lightning. Because our patch, it's a semicircle with a lightning, it's a red patch with a,
You have
it's
it.
not this thing. This was done by Walt Disney. Disney did a lot of, not just us, but he did a lot of America divisions. He created, Disney created this thing for us. But our actual patch, I don't think I brought, no, I didn't bring it. It's a lightning streak, and that's the Lightning Division.
You were a combat medic.
Yes.
Did you treat any German prisoners of war?
Yes, during the Bulge, believe it or not, because they were flowing in like crazy, left and right. It's funny, your first exposure to combat is so shocking. You're starting to see mutilated bodies and blood all over the place, and you treated everybody, including the German soldier, just as much as the American soldier. Yes, sir.
What was the worst wound that you ever had to treat?
I didn't treat wounds after a while because I was with the Major Plessett. And what we treated were poor guys that couldn't take care of themselves.
Psychos, yeah.
And I had in many cases, it got so, during the Bulge, we had to build a gigantic tent, like a giant circus tent, and put cots, hundreds of cots in there, and the guys were pouring in. You see, I was in what is called a clearing station. And the clearing station in an infantry division is the last hope of retaining the soldier. If he leaves us and goes behind the lines, we'll never see him again, because he goes to a hospital of some kind, and who knows where he's going to end up. So it was our job to try to see that they fix them good enough to get back into combat. When you're losing thousands of men, it's very serious. Every man counts. So our mission really was not first to take care of it, make sure he's alive and well, and to hopefully send him back, to cure him within a couple of days, or else he has to go back to a hospital. I was sent back to a hospital once, at the tail end of the Bulge. As we're moving in the town of Kestenik, I developed dysentery. And I was suffering so much. Being a medic, I had various access to pills and stuff. I had morphine. I had a thing called sodium amytal. We called them Blue 88. An 88 was the Germans' powerful artillery piece, much better than anything we ever had. So we called them Blue 88s. And I took a Blue 88 because I just couldn't take it anymore. And the next thing I knew, I'm in a hospital, deeper in Belgium. And there's a female nurse taking a needle out of my rear end, saying, "Hey, hello there." I was so thrilled. It was so...
And
I have no idea whether I was gone for 1 day, 5 days, but she said, "You have an option. Do you want to go back to your outfit? We'll get a jeep to take you back to your outfit, or go to the rear." I said, "I want to be..." You always want to be with your buddies. So I said, "I want to go to my outfit." And I never had to... I was so stupid, I never asked anybody, "How long have I been gone?" I have no idea.
And why was it that you took the Blue 88?
Why did I take the Blue... To put me... I knew it was very powerful. As I say, I was out, and the next thing I knew, I was in a hospital when I woke up to a nurse. And I repeat again, I don't know if it was just overnight. I don't know if it was 2 or 3 days.
Was it because you had dementia that you couldn't sleep?
Dysentery.
Dysentery. What is dysentery?
That means your stomach is... You're going to the bathroom every 10 seconds.
Oh.
Even though you got nothing left, you're still doing it. And we didn't have bathrooms, by the way. I forget to tell you that. It's outdoors in the middle of the winter.
And you can die. It's the worst case of
Oh, you can die
diarrhea
from
you
it,
have,
sure,
and
sure.
dehydration, and then organ
Total
failure.
dehydration,
Yeah.
right. Right, because that's exactly what happens. You feel the pain of it, and you got to go, but nothing comes out of you because there's no more liquid in you. Obviously, some guys saw me there and took care of me.
And how was the food then that you got dysentery?
Food, if you want to call it that. We had K rations, C rations. K rations was like a popcorn box, and it would have a little bit of meat and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. A C ration was a little bit better. During the Bulge, all we could get was K rations. It had a chocolate bar, but it wasn't real chocolate. It was very powerful chocolate, so it gave you a lot of energy. And that's about it. And every now and then, I remember Thanksgiving, we got a real hot meal. They brought in stuff,
And
or Christmas maybe.
May I ask a question? The USO, did you ever have a chance to catch a USO show?
Yeah. Boy, did I. Now, our war's over, VE Day. We're occupying in Germany. And they announced to us that there's going to be a USO show in Kassel, Germany. That's a big city, reasonably big city. And anybody that wants to go can go. I think it was anybody, but anyhow, I went. The show was Jack Benny was the head of it. You guys probably never even heard of Jack Benny. And a lady by the name of Ingrid Bergman was there. Now, for some lucky reason, we went to a gigantic open-air amphitheater, probably 10,000 soldiers there. You go where they tell you to go. I was right up front. Not because I'm honorary, just the breaks of the game. So I'm right up front. I'm no further from here to that wall to the stage. I fell in love with Ingrid Bergman. I can't tell you. That woman is the most, to this day, I think of her, and outside of my wife, who has here, so I better say it, oh, God, did I love Ingrid Bergman. And she didn't sing or anything. She had no talent except to be beautiful.
Oh, she was a good actress.
Oh, she was a wonderful actress, right.
We just saw part of Casablanca, the famous movie that she
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful woman, beautiful.
Oh, did I love her.
Tony?
Okay, you mentioned ACAC.
Well, that was at the Rhine.
Can you explain what ACAC is?
Oh, that's artillery. Artillery
aircraft
shells.
weapon?
The ACAC, they're just trying to knock down airplanes. You send up ACAC. And what happened at the Rhine River, once we crossed it, they lined the bumper to bumper to bumper to bumper with ACAC guns because they knew these German planes were going to come around trying to bomb the river. So there was tons of ACAC going up. And of course, what goes up comes down too. So, in fact, I had an interesting experience there. Should I mention it?
sure.
We're on the west side of the river, still, west side, right. And we're staying in what turned out to be a convent school. And I stayed on the top floor. I don't know, I'd say fifth, I couldn't be that high. I stayed on the top, and we spread a litter, and we just slept there. And when we woke up in the morning, believe me, you could sleep through anything if you've been through a lot. There was no roof anymore. The stuff from the ACAC had blasted, and there was litter all around us.
And you slept through it. And you slept through that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the nuns were running that school, I remember, because this is a funny story, too. Remember Art Stone, Janie?
Yes.
Art Stone was up there, too. He finally took his underwear off. And in the morning, it was gone. And he says, these damn Germans, they'll even steal your dirty underwear. Would you believe before we left, the nuns had taken everything that they saw and washed it in their laundry and brought him back upstairs. And he was cursing them, and then he apologized to us that he was cursing them. He lived down here in Florida. He died just recently, Art Stone.
Let's see. Can you tell us, once your training was finished in England, how you got to France?
In an LST. You know, we all were all down in the bottom of the hold, and they give us a little French book. And the first thing that you're going to, où est le lavabo? Where is the bathroom? That's the first thing they teach you. And they gave us all seasick pills, because the Channel is a very rough place. In fact, we couldn't go for about 3 days. We were supposed to go, but the weather was so bad, so we didn't go. And 3 days later, we finally crossed.
And what month was that?
Oh, that was well after D-Day. That was, I guess, August.
44?
Yeah.
44, right.
And when you went to college, did you use the GI Bill?
Absolutely. I think that was one of the greatest things for America. Tens of thousands of young boys, and women too, there was quite a few women, not like now, but quite a few, would never have gone to college if it wasn't for the GI Bill. I went at Syracuse University, it didn't cost me a nickel. The GI Bill took care of the tuition, and every soldier had so many points. You get extra points for being overseas, you get extra points for being in the battle, you get extra points if you were awarded medals. I received 2 Bronze Star medals. And those points add up to dollars. In addition to tuition, you got to buy books and all kinds of things, so you use those points for your books. I never had to pay a penny for all of Syracuse University.
Once you graduated college, what business did you go into?
Well, I made the mistake of getting married immediately. Not the mistake with the girl, the mistake with income. I then realized, then I made an even bigger mistake. I found out my wife was pregnant. So I realized money now enters into the picture. You better get a job. So I went to the placement bureau at Syracuse. You know, they have it and they can tell you different things that are going on. And I got a job with a floor. I couldn't even go back to New York. This was up in Syracuse because I had a pregnant wife who I loved. So I what?
You stayed there.
I stayed there. I got a job with a floor covering distributor. We sold Mohawk carpet, which is still around, and Armstrong flooring, which is still around. And we represented them in upstate New York and Albany and Buffalo and Connecticut, and I was like a traveling salesman for them. But at least I had a job. I made $50 a week. That was money. Rent was $40 a month for the apartment we had in Syracuse.
You mentioned receiving 2 Bronze Star medals.
One for the Battle of the Bulge and one for Remagen. I've got the awards here. You want to see what a Bronze Star looks
Yes,
like?
I'd love to.
Sure do, yeah. You got it. Jump right on that one.
This is, they send it in a thing like this, United States of America, and there it is. This is the actual medal. Your name is emblazoned on the back. This is what you wear, you know, fancy, and this is what, when you see what they call the fruit salad,
Yes.
this is what you wear, the fruit salad, and this is what you wear as a civilian on your lapel or something like that. And I have 2 of them.
Sir, could you hold it up so we can get it on the camera?
Get your finger out of there.
Well, there's a thing covering it. And on the back, is your name is embossed into it. You can't see it, but it says Robert W. Erskine. Yeah, cut the W. You want to hear something funny? This, I only received this a year ago December.
Oh.
A year ago December.
Must have been on backboard.
How come a little delay?
Well, it's not that big of a delay.
This one,
Only a
the
couple seconds.
original, the other one I got way back. This one came. This one is for the Battle of the Bulge. They apologized and said the records were lost in St. Louis, Missouri, where they keep records. There was a big fire there, and they lost the records for 40, 50 years or something like that. But they said you're entitled to this, so if you want it, put it out.
And did you bring the older one?
I brought pictures of it. They're hanging on my wall because there's also a diploma, like saying thank you for your ground combat with the enemy. And I got pictures of it. By the way, this is me and my brother way back then.
Good looking.
I was able to spend 3 days with him together, and so they had us take pictures together. This was him, of course, and this was me.
He was 4.5 years.
4.5 years older than me. He graduated Johns Hopkins University, and instead of going to medical school, went straight into the service. He wrote a letter to my parents. It's a very poignant letter saying, I know you're going to be shocked to hear this, but I just enlisted. I cannot sit. He was so patriotic, it's not even funny. I can't sit by and let the war go on without me trying to do whatever I can for our great country. I have the letters, by the way. I have many of them. He was a wonderful person and a very heroic, loyal American. What was I going to show you? Oh, let's see. Belgium, Jackie. Oh, that's another interesting thing that I could tell you, a nice thing that I did.
You tell us
When we went to Belgium, the 78th Division issues a magazine every quarter or so. And I saw a letter in one of them in the magazine just before we went over from a woman called Phyllis Heaney, and she said something about my uncle is buried in Belgium, and he was in the 78th, and I just want you to know that, and so on. So when we went over, I insisted on going to this cemetery. It's this beautiful cemetery. And here is a picture of me with the superintendent of the cemetery. American cemeteries there are American soil. Belgium gives it to America because these are all Americans buried there. And so he's an American in charge of the cemetery. In this particular cemetery, it's called Henri Chapelle. There's 8,000 American soldiers buried there. 7,900 and something is the official number. And so I insisted, Armentrout, his name was, I said, do you know, his name was Corporal Dizak. And he said, oh, sure, I'll look it up. He looked it up, he took me there, and we had this picture taken. That's a 78th Division flag. Oh, there's two of them. Oh, they're separate ones. And we decorated it and put an American flag in front of it and said a little prayer there and everything. And then I wrote to Phyllis Heaney and I sent her these pictures. And she wrote back to me, she says, I don't know how to thank you. She says, here it is, 50-something years later, nobody ever visited my uncle, ever, his grave, and I'm so thrilled and I can't thank you enough. And she said, since that event, a young Belgian girl, and I understand this happens often, has adopted this stone, and she takes care of it. Every week she puts a flower there and everything. And I understand this goes on all over in the cemetery. The Belgian young kids adopt a gravestone and take care of it. Let me tell you, we went there, we spent quite a bit of time at the cemetery. It is so manicured. The finest golf course in America isn't nearly as manicured as this cemetery is, Henri Chapelle. So American dead are treated with respect by the Belgians. They sure are.
When you visited Belgium, you were saying that how well treated you were by the Belgian people. Is that the older generation or is that the younger generation?
Well, it's all. All. The older teach the younger there. Unlike here in America, well, of course, you've got to remember, these people were occupied by the Nazis for almost 5 years. For almost 5 years, they were no longer Belgians. They had to speak German. They were sent to German schools. Jackie was 11 years old. Marcel was 8 years old, and so on.
Right.
They weren't. They were no longer Belgians. So 5 years later, when we liberate them, we are their saviors. And to this day, they feel that way. They are just super people. They really are, and they teach their younger generations. But I have many things here.
Mr. Erskine, we can't thank you enough. I've got to get these guys out to lunch so that...
Good. They deserve it.
They do.
Having
You should get
sat through all of
copies
this.
some of those
And,
photos.
yeah, could I just grab the photos and then I'll take some, I'll get some copies of them. I can bring
I
right
got
back to
so
you.
many things. You're not going to want all of this.
Mr. White?
You're welcome.
Oh, yeah, kill it and kill it.
Or do you remember what was going on that day?
Oh, I sure do, because as I recall, it was a Sunday,
Yeah, it was.
and I was listening. There was no television in those days. I was listening to a football game, because they had pro football on Sundays then, and all the interruptions came about the Japanese attacking us at Pearl Harbor. I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was, neither did my parents. But that's where I was, at home, listening to a football game. Probably the New York Giants.
That's nice.
There's a river we were already in Germany when the Germans broke through to create the Bulge. They broke through just south of us. We were in the northern spot. They broke through just south of us, so we were divided from the rest of the American troops. And there's a river right there called the Roer, R-O-E-R River. And there's several dams, 3 dams I think, the main one called Schwammenul Dam, that controlled the Roer River. And if the dams ever burst, or the Germans blew them up, it would create a floodplain all the way across Germany it was estimated that could be as much as 1.5 miles wide. So it was our mission to capture the Schwammenul Dam. That was the 78th mission at that time. This is early December. And that's what it was. So the Germans, and this is another interesting fact, on the east side of the Rhine, it's big cliffs, high up. You go way uphill on the east side. And they had field artillery there. They kept trying to hit the bridge to collapse it. Then we saw what were airplanes, and it was the first jet planes that... America had no jet planes. There were no such thing as... Everything was a propeller in America at that time. And we saw these jet planes without propellers, and they made our planes look like they were in slow motion. They came around and threw bombs at the bridge. Now, they're fighter planes, so they're not bomber planes, and therefore I'm sure the pilots literally threw the bombs out. But this went on for about 2 or 3 days, and obviously they never hit they're coming maybe 500 miles an hour around the cliff, and then as soon as it comes around the cliff, our artillery's trying to hit them, our ACAC. And at any rate, they weakened the bridge. They never really hit it, but there were so many, about 4 or 5 days later, we had already had tens of thousands of troops crossing by then. The bridge actually collapsed.